Hi, everyone, and welcome to If She Knew, a podcast where we talk about mental health, vulnerability, and all sorts of real life experiences that a lot of people go through but don't really talk about. Today, we are lucky enough to be joined by Anna, who does content creation on social media. She shares about her experience with her chronic illness, and she runs support groups in LA for chronic illness. So, I'm really excited to get into that conversation today. As always, if you haven't already, go ahead and follow on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube under Tierney's Journey, which is at TIERNEYS Journey, as well as follow along on Spotify for weekly episodes. As always, I like to say that we are not professionals in this topic, we're just sharing our own experiences. So if you need help, please go seek a therapist or a provider that can help you. Let's get into it. Today, we're joined with Anna, who's going to talk about her story and experience with chronic illness. So, to start, do you want to tell us kind of what kind of content you create and where people can find you?
Yes. So I had the sudden onset of a rare chronic illness that completely changed my life. So I document my journey online with that and also make content that's very relatable for others who are suffering from chronic illness. You can find me on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube.
Okay, and then what is your username?
It's my first name, Anna, ANNA underscore, and then my last name, DIBLOSI. And it's
Okay,
the same handle across all platforms.
and I'll also link you below wherever this is posted so that people can go and look at your content. So, to start then, can you kind of tell us about like an overview of your story? When did you first notice symptoms and when did you start getting treatment? All that kind of stuff.
Yes. So my story with chronic illness started on a vacation to Tulum, Mexico in May of 2022. I got food poisoning on the last day of my trip, and within a week, about a week of being back in the States, I woke up one morning and felt like somebody had taken a lit match to my body. Like my skin, flesh, and bones had felt like they'd been set on fire. I had really bad weakness in my hands. I was struggling to even pick up like a glass of water or my phone. Really bad, like tingling, numbness, prickly. I had something called neuropathic itch, which is when you feel itchy on the inside, which is very intense, coupled with the level of pain that I was in. I mean, I just remember like laying in a bed, like screaming because I felt like even a breath was going to like shatter my bones on the inside. I got to a point that I couldn't walk because of the pain. I needed a wheelchair. I needed help even going to the bathroom. So it was truly an agony that was onset so quickly that I barely have words for. So obviously, when you're feeling that level of symptoms, you are hospitalized very quickly, but they were unable to diagnose me. So I spent about 2 years, 2.5 years as a medical mystery before getting diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder called CIDP. And that stands for chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyradicular neuropathy. It is a mouthful, but it's essentially when your immune system attacks your nerves. So, I mean, I am medicated for this now, which is how I'm able to like even talk to you today. But the symptoms are still very intense and something that I battle every single day.
And is this like a pretty rare condition for a lot of people, or do a lot of people get this from things like food poisoning and stuff like that?
Yeah, so it is considered like a rare disease. It can be triggered by anything. Food poisoning is one of them. It can be any kind of viral infection, bacterial infection. It's a little bit random. It's also very closely associated with something called Guillain-Barré syndrome.
Okay.
So that's something that I think a few more people are familiar with. And it presents in a few different ways. So pretty much when you have Guillain-Barré syndrome, if it presents differently than textbook or if it becomes chronic, that's when you're moved into the like CIDP category. But they are very closely linked, and both of them are when your immune system essentially turns on your peripheral nervous system.
Wow. That is super interesting and I imagine super painful and hard to transition in life from being not having that to all of a sudden having all these symptoms. I know you talk a lot about how difficult it can be navigating the US healthcare system. How I know you said it's like a 2-year process for you to get diagnosed. What was that process like?
So the US healthcare system is a beast in its own right. I think being an undiagnosed patient is something that's very scary, frustrating, It's intense and it's something that nobody should have to go through. Um, as far as like getting diagnosed and stuff, I was in and out of hospital beds, in and out of doctor's offices, having test after test after test done with everything coming back normal. And so when you don't have that objective evidence, these doctors start ping-ponging you between specialties, right? So you go see a neurologist, they say everything's fine, go see rheumatology. Rheumatology says everything's fine, go talk to a neurologist. And back and forth until you feel like you've been ping-ponged into oblivion. I had no objective medical findings and quite an extensive amount of medical records, that quite frankly, a lot of doctors don't want to deal with. It takes a lot of time and energy to work with a medically complex patient. And I would say the unfortunate part of the situation is that my experience was not unusual, right? I mean, many people with chronic illnesses take a very long time to get diagnosed.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I mean, obviously, I can't relate to that extent, but I have had that experience of being pushed around to like a bunch of different specialists that specialize in, because I had at one point like super high levels of eosinophils, which is like the high white blood cell count, um, and nobody could figure it out. So eventually, that's probably not a good thing to do, but I just stopped going because I was just tired of it. And I'm sure that a lot of people end up doing that, and that's obviously not the best, but it's can be really challenging and a lot of money and a lot of travel to go to all of these specialists, and it be taking years to find out how to actually feel better. So I
Yeah.
imagine, yeah, that being really
I
hard.
think that this, like as you mentioned, wanting to give up, I think that's when your support system is so important. I truly don't think I could have gone through this experience without my mother,
Mhm.
because there was many, many, many times that I was just like, forget it. I've had 20 rheumatologists tell me I'm fine. You just get so beaten down by the system that you want to just surrender to it because everyone's telling you there's nothing out there for you. You're making it up. You have really bad anxiety. And couple that with the stress of like being out of work, for example, with having to find doctors that have already told you no in the past, and you're just hoping this next one tells you yes. And like you mentioned, like travel, things like that. When you're in these dealing with these illnesses, a lot of times, like for me, travel is difficult. I have to be driven to appointments. So if I didn't have somebody to drive me to appointments as consistently as I did, there's no way I think I would have made it this far. So I think it's really important to lean on your support system, whether that's, parents, friends, partners, whoever it is, as much as you can, because it really, I think, makes a difference.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought up too about them saying like you just have anxiety, because I feel like that is such a common thing you see with people, especially who have been diagnosed now with chronic illnesses, that in the past trying to get diagnoses, they just keep saying, you're fine, everything's coming back normal, it's just anxiety. And then eventually they figure out that they have ulcerative colitis or something like that. And it's like, you feel like you're going crazy because you are experiencing all these symptoms. And it's almost like the doctors don't believe you necessarily because nothing is coming back in like clinical terms of like labs and stuff that they're drawing.
Oh, 100%. And they love to pass things off as anxiety. I mean, I remember looking at one doctor's reports saying that I was having, oh, I can't remember the exact terminology they used. Something about severe depressive and anxious episodes as the root cause of what was going on. And we didn't even talk about mental health in that session. They took it upon themselves to put that in there. And then there's the other side of it is why can a rheumatologist diagnose me with an anxiety disorder when that falls under psychiatry? A psychiatrist can't treat me for an autoimmune disease, so why do they have the authority to? And I think it makes a lot of patients feel dismissed, especially when it is not brought up in the session. And I think that happens, you know, very, very commonly.
Yeah, that's really sad to hear, especially because then it sets up, because obviously when you go to other doctors, they read reports from your past doctors that you've seen. So that sets up then a false image of what's going on with you, like, and creates kind of a bias with certain doctors then that are seeing you now because they read that and they might think the same thing now that that doctor said, oh, it was anxiety or something like that, even though you had no conversations with them about that.
Yeah. And I always say this, doctors should not be weaponizing mental health against you. If you're someone that is suffering from a complex or undiagnosed medical situation, You are going to have anxiety. You are going to have depression. That is something that comes with the territory, and they should be acknowledging that and getting you help for those things versus weaponizing it against you and blaming it as the root cause of all of your symptoms.
Yeah,
For sure.
that's a really great point because I could see how a lot of people wouldn't correlate that a chronic illness is causing you to have anxiety, depression because you can't do the same things or because you're in a lot of pain, and then doing the reverse and being like, oh, well, because you have anxiety, that's why you have these pain flare ups and stuff like that. So, yeah, that's a really good point that I'm glad you brought up. But so you've talked about getting done a bunch of like different medical procedures. One of them being an EMG. Is that what it's called? Yeah. Okay. So you talked about feeling like you weren't necessarily the most prepared going into it. Why do you feel like you weren't prepared, and what conversations slash questions do you think that people should be asking or having with their doctor before going into these types of procedures?
Yes. So, in my experience with these intensive tests, is that they are so routine in hospitals that doctors, I think, don't even process how intensive they can be for patients. And I think that they need to, well, like I said, to back up, I had this experience specifically with an EMG. So, this is a test where they put needles into your muscles and send shocks through them to measure muscle activity. It's very, very painful. It sent me into a flare for weeks. It was like 2 hours long. I was sweating. The machine is very archaic looking. It looks like you're putting like medieval needles into you they're very thick. And sent me into a flare for like weeks. And I think that what you need to do as a patient is over research. Like no matter what it is that a doctor sends you to do, whether it's testing, imaging, do over research for it because that's the only way that you're actually going to be prepared for what's going to be going on. And I would also ask the doctors to kind of explain it to you like you're 5 years old and watch the YouTube videos of it. And also ask a lot of detailed questions about like what to experience after. Because another thing with people who are suffering from chronic health conditions is we're already in a lot of pain. We're already nauseous all the time. So for the average patient, the procedure might be no big deal. But for somebody who already has a more sensitive body, we're going to be in a lot more pain than everybody else. So asking your doctor about pain management. What happens if you're nauseous for 3 days after? You told me that most people go to work the next day. What's your most extreme case and what happened to them in it? So you really have to over communicate with your doctor and make sure that you have either medication that you're prepared for or when can I get a hold of you? If my appointment's at 4 p.m. on a Friday, what's your personal email address? What's your phone number in case I need to get a hold of you for pain management?
Yeah, those are really great points. And I love that you brought that up because I always like to say you are paying for your doctor's appointments. So, like, doctors have a tendency to come in and be like, give you like the 5 minute checkup, rundown, even though you've waited there for like 30 minutes, an hour. So, ask all the questions. I don't care if you think it's a stupid question, ask all the questions you need to ask because that's your time and you're paying for that time. So, get everything that you need out of it. I always
Yeah.
like when people bring that up.
Yeah, I always say prepare for your doctor's appointment like you're preparing for a meeting with your boss. It's something that has to be approached strategically. It really does. So not only having detailed questions up front, but if you're going to see a neurologist and you had a brain imaging done with another doctor, make sure and bring that, have the radiology report printed out on the top of the pile. And also being really on top of next steps. So if the doctor's going to send you out for, say your test comes back normal, what's going to happen then? Are they going to send you out for blood tests? Okay, can I be sent out for the blood test and the EMG, for example, right now? You really have to be one step ahead of these doctors because not only are you paying for their time, but you also want to maximize the time that you have with them, right? Because you see a doctor, you have to wait another month to go again to get your next 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes that you have with them. So really squeezing the amount of information the most that you can in the time that you have.
Yeah, something else that I also know is like a good and helpful way to do this is writing down questions or like topics you have to talk about on like a piece of paper because once you get into the appointments, you can start to feel like flustered and like forget stuff that you wanted to ask and then leave and be like, "Oh, I didn't ask this stuff." So, if you go in think about what you want to talk about before, write it all down so that way you can look at that during your appointment and know that you are asking all the questions that you wanted to ask. And I feel like that's also a really important thing to do.
Oh, absolutely. Because doctors also can get off on tangents on things, and sometimes you do have to direct and lead the conversation yourself.
Yeah. And kind of going into like another type of treatment, I know that you have done ketamine treatments and IVIG infusions. What does that like entail? What do those treatments look like?
Yes, so ketamine is the one I definitely get the most questions on. It's historically been used for mental health. However, it's only recently been introduced to treat pain conditions. It is much, much stronger when used for pain than it is mental health, and it's used a little bit differently. So I started out with the sublingual, which is what most people do. It's kind of like a little Altoid that you just put in your mouth, you let it dissolve, and then you feel the effects of it afterwards. So I started with that, and I eventually worked my way up to intramuscular injections, which were a lot more intense and definitely felt like something I should have had a medical degree to be doing to myself. You got the vial of ketamine, a really thick needle, and you've got a really, oh my gosh, I had to go in through my thigh muscle, and you could feel it going in. Um, it did work a lot. I do recommend it to people. It tremendously helped my pain. I, for a while, thought I was going to have my life back because I was doing so well. But a good thing to know about ketamine is that it is a Band-Aid medication. It is not going to fix the root cause of anything. And another thing is there is a psychological trade-off, right? So I think on the lower dose sublingual, you're just getting maybe a little bit of a head rush, a little bit of a head high. I would kind of do like a 30-minute to an hour like guided meditation online, and I would be fine for the rest of the day. But when you work up to those higher doses, uh, I mean, you're like tripping the whole day. There's an intense euphoria that comes with it. I mean, I got to a point that I was having to do it every day and I couldn't do anything else. It's a few hours in the morning that you're kind of peaking on it, and then it starts to wane as the day goes on. However, even towards the end of the day, you're not able to drive. You're not able to really do anything. Like even when it's worn off, you still are pretty out of it. So you're kind of stuck at home. And even say you have a friend come over and chat, like you definitely want to say, hey, by the way, I had ketamine this morning. So your body feels great, your pain is down, but at the higher doses, you are trading off mental clarity, I should say. So
Okay.
yeah, I recommend to people if they haven't tried it and they're suffering from a pain condition to try it. One thing I was not aware of at the start that I wish I knew was that you can develop a tolerance to it. So that's kind of what happened to me is it was, oh my God, this is amazing. I'm going to be able to live my life, all these great things. I'm not going to be in pain anymore. And then just one day it pretty much just stopped working and I had to come off of it. I've considered trying it again. With my treatment right now, it's not really the best, but there are trade-offs with it, but it's definitely worth asking your provider about if it is legal in your state.
Okay. That's an interesting point you just added there about it being legal in your state. So is that it's not necessarily legal in every state in the US?
I don't think so based on people that have reached out to me and told
Okay.
me. I thought it was everywhere, but I've had a couple of people reach out to me from the South and said that they couldn't find a provider. So I don't know that if it's illegal everywhere or if it's just harder to find a provider to do it. Because I know even here in California, it's a specialty. Not everybody's handing it out. You can't just go to a general rheumatologist and get it. You have to find somebody that specializes in it or a ketamine clinic.
Okay. And that's so you're saying like you got to a point where you were using it every day. How often do you use it like when you're first starting?
I think I started with every third day.
Okay.
And then when that started to not be strong enough, every second day. And then once I reached the cap of how much I could take per day in the sublingual tabs, that's when I shifted to the injections. IV is another popular way that people do it. My doctor is hyper specialized in ketamine. He felt that the at-home injections uh, were the same potency, and you can do it A at home and B, it is a fraction of the cost. I mean, the IV ones are thousands of dollars. And I think the IV ones you go in either once a week or once every other week, but at least in the state of California, you're looking at anywhere from 1 to 2 grand per infusion, and insurance does not cover this. Where with the injections, I think it was like $200 a month. So it's still a high out-of-pocket cost, but if finances are something that you want to be mindful of, definitely ask your doctor about the intramuscular injections.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and we'll get into the financial stuff in a little
Yes.
bit as well. Um, so IVIG, that's infusions, right? IV infusions.
Yes. So IVIG is very common for a lot of things, especially autoimmune. And if you're someone that's not familiar with how IVIG works, it the idea with an autoimmune disorder is that your immune system is creating harmful antibodies that are attacking your healthy body. So IVIG is essentially an IV bag full of donor antibodies. And it is a human byproduct, but these donor antibodies are good, well-behaved antibodies. And so the idea is you flush your system with it, and eventually your bad antibodies will leave your immune system and it'll be overrode by the good ones that they put in there, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the gold standard for a lot of autoimmune disorders. They use it for viral infections in the hospital, all kinds of stuff. And it has helped a lot of people. It helped me at about the 6-month mark. You do have to build it up in your system. However, it was not moving the needle enough for me to continue. So I moved over to something called plasmapheresis, which is like IVIG on steroids. The way that it works is they hook you up to this big machine. It's done in a hospital setting. They suck all the blood out of your body. They separate your blood from your plasma because the plasma is what houses those harmful antibodies that I mentioned. Throw away the plasma and replace it with something called albumin, which is essentially donor plasma. So then they remix the donor plasma with your blood and stick it back in your body. So it's just pretty much a more thorough and intense way to replace those antibodies that are the root cause of most autoimmune disorders. So that's helped me a lot more. It also is a lot less frequent and a lot shorter. It's only 2 hours compared to like a 4-hour infusion that I was doing multiple times per month. The thing is with these autoimmune disorders and things like CIDP in particular is you really got to find that perfect cocktail. So that's kind of what me and my doctor and my medical team are working through right now is finding the perfect cocktail of IVIG, plasmapheresis. There's a few other medications out on the market that I haven't tried that I won't get into yet. And you've kind of got to figure that out. And some people are on these things lifelong. Some people go into remission after 6 months. So it just really varies from person to person, which has kind of been the biggest, I think, struggle with all of this is there's not just a one pill cure all. It's a lot of trial and error, and a lot of these things take a very long time to work.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up that not like everything is like a specific cocktail for each person and not every medicine will work for you because I think that's something that can be probably pretty frustrating for a lot of people to see like okay, this worked for this person, like I'm going to try it, it's going to work for me and then not to have the same results and kind of be discouraged in some ways about needing to find another treatment. Is that something that like you've felt through like past treatments at all?
So yes and no, because I was misdiagnosed for a very long time, and I knew I was misdiagnosed. So I was having pills pretty much shoved down my throat for things that I in my gut knew I didn't have.
Mm.
But you're at the mercy of doctors, right? So they thought that I had an arthritis situation, which all the research that I did, I'm like, this is not arthritis. I read about arthritis. I've heard people talk about arthritis online. This is not arthritis, but they pretty much didn't want to take no for an answer. And so I went through dozens of arthritis medications, knowing that they weren't going to do anything. But these doctors, if you don't take them, they're like, well, it's because you didn't take the arthritis medication. That's why you're not healed. They're like, you have arthritis, even though there was nothing, no objective evidence saying I had arthritis, absolutely nothing at all. They felt like that was what I had. So there's a lot of trial and error just in that when you're medically complex or dealing with a chronic illness that you don't have answers to right off the bat. You kind of have to listen to what these doctors say. Otherwise, you get into the realm of they think that you don't respect them. They think that you're being a difficult patient. They're going to put in your chart you refused medication that would help you. So there is a very delicate dance, I think, between the patient and the doctor to getting the help that you need. And some people, my doctors actually mentioned recently, like now that the plasma is really moving the needle for you, maybe we introduce one of these medications that have been traditionally used for arthritis, even though you don't have arthritis on top of it. I mean, I don't know how the science works on the back end. Obviously, I'm not a doctor, but there can be a lot of playing with medications and playing with treatment options. That's also going to vary from doctor to doctor, because that's another thing is there haven't many doctors aren't going to prescribe the same thing. So even if you do have something maybe like a traditional autoimmune disease, like a lupus or something like that, and there's more than one medication that can treat it, certain doctors are going to feel strongly towards certain medications. And your
Mhm.
body at the end of the day is going to react the best to only one of those. So there's a lot of toying that goes into it with both treatments and medication.
Yeah, and I've seen on your page before you talked about getting treatment like in other countries. Is that something that you consider doing or you ended up doing that? Or
Considered, as of right now, no. I got to a point, I mean, I spent so many years with my conditioning worsening and being unable to move, being completely dependent on my parents. This all started when I was 26. So I was very young when this all happened. And I had doctors across the country. I saw doctors in New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco at the top hospitals, all the top doctors that you can imagine. And they all told me I was crazy. I was fine. It was anxiety. It was going to go away on its own. I had one doctor tell me that I would be on the front page of the LA Times if this didn't go away on its own in a few months. And so when you're facing that kind of thing from these quote unquote top hospitals, you have to start looking elsewhere at what your options are. And Germany is considered one of the leading countries for healthcare and medical care. There are a few clinics out there that I explored because I mean, I just got to a point that my parents were like, I couldn't move. I was fully dependent. Like I literally could not move. What were we supposed to do? Um, so I luckily, in that period of time before we ended up committing to anything, found the doctor that essentially saved my life and was able to diagnose me correctly. However, had I not found them, I think that I would definitely be exploring other countries. And I've talked to people too that have CIDP and other conditions that have gotten help in Germany is probably the biggest one, with Mexico actually being the second biggest one. But it's not that uncommon. So if you're someone that's really struggling to get help in the United States, do not be scared to start researching other options in other countries.
yeah, that's something, especially I've had a couple of friends with Lyme's disease that
Hmm.
the US is really like they don't take Lyme disease seriously. They give you like 2 weeks of antibiotics and then they're like, okay, you know, that's all I can do for you. But a lot of them go to Mexico or Germany, like you were saying, to get treatments because I've had people that I've known that literally could not move at all. We're getting all these like hearing problems and like all these things from Lyme disease that they just like couldn't treat here. So I've heard of like them having to go to Mexico and stuff to get treatment for that and it working because they have other treatment styles and medications that are available there that we don't have in the US.
Yeah, another thing which I know we're about to get into is financials in these other countries. I remember when I was doing my due diligence and research, obviously I'm used to the American healthcare system. So you're looking at these and you're like, oh my God, these are going to be hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to get help. And come to find out, it is not the case in other countries because with my plasmapheresis, we struggled with insurance approval at first. And there's a clinic down in Mexico that my doctor works with actually for people that are unable to get it approved. And it is beyond a fraction of the price. So it actually, I mean, in some situations, depending on what your health insurance situation is, could actually be more cost effective to look elsewhere.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And with that, we'll kind of get into this now. I know that you have mentioned that you're not working anymore because of your chronic illness. Do you want to kind of talk about that process of like going into, I'm guessing you were on some sort of like leave or disability for a period of time when you were still working and then ended up leaving your job or something like that?
Yeah, so as far as employment goes, I stepped away from my job on medical leave. I was very lucky to work at a company that gave me a full year of medical leave pay. So I was able to exhaust that. And once I hit that year, I pretty much had the option to I either needed to come back to work full time or I needed to resign for medical reasons. And the biggest piece of advice I have is apply for disability. If you are unable to work, do not be scared to apply for disability. I think there's two factors of it. One being the stigma is no one's excited to start living off of government benefits, especially if you're somebody that had a full-time job before. I think a lot of people, we get a lot of purpose out of being able to financially take care of ourselves and go to work every day. So there's a little bit of a stigma of that. I think people being scared to apply, and also the fear that, their situation's permanent. If the government, if you get approval on disability, that means that you're a disabled person forever, which isn't always the case. The biggest thing, which every state, when it comes to state level disability, is different. Some states do not offer state level disability. Some states, like I'm in California, so I can only speak from California's perspective. California allows a full year temporary disability leave where you're paid your full salary that you're receiving at your last job. And that was relatively easy for me to get. So apply for that as soon as possible, because every day that you don't apply, you're losing money. And if you do think this is going to be a severe long-term situation, apply for federal disability, because that can take up to 2 years to get approved. And that's, the appeals, you might have to get a lawyer. So get on that as soon as possible. And lastly, don't forget about other government benefits that exist besides just disability checks. Like I had a gap between when I was getting my disability money and when I was working, that I had zero income. So I was able to get EBT. So that was an extra few $100 a month I was able to get for groceries. And like I said, this kind of varies from state to state. There's different things that are available. I know some people in the state level are able to get payment for cost for caretakers. That can also come with federal disability, I think, but there's a lot of options out there, and not being afraid to use them and exhaust them, because there is money out there for you. And don't forget, like, you pay taxes into this. If you were working before, a portion of your paycheck was taken out to fund programs like disability. Your parents are paying into disability. Your friends are. Like, do not be afraid to get that money. It is your money, and it is there for you to survive. So do not empty out your bank account trying to pay rent when these services exist.
Yeah, I love that you said that, because I could tell that there's definitely like people get a sense of pride in working and earning money by working like a full-time job, and they don't want to accept like charity from the government and stuff like that. And I think that you're right, there is like a stigma. A lot of people judge people for accepting that stuff and not working a full-time job, but those things are there for a reason. So I love that you're saying like take advantage of that. And it's super interesting. I didn't know that it takes up to 2 years for federal disability to get approved. That
And most people are going to need a lawyer, is the
wow.
reality of it. It is very intense, and it has gotten even worse over the last few years, especially if you're under the age of 50. It is near impossible to get approval under the age of 50. So there's a lot of hoops that you need to be educated on to get through that process. Another thing too, like you said, most of us, we enjoy working. It gives us purpose. It gives us fulfillment. We want to be financially independent people. So if you get disability and start on disability and you get better, you can stop accepting benefits. Like, just because it's helping you out during this time doesn't mean you need to be on it forever. Ideally, the situation is this helps you get through this bridge. And then once you get over the bridge, if you can get better, get the treatment that you need, get back to work, you will no longer need it. So there's a lot of ways to approach it and think about it, and just don't be scared to apply for it.
Yeah, and I think that's another aspect too that you mentioned is needing a lawyer, because that's another financial expense that you have to put into. Because I mean, I'm not aware of. I would have to do some research into if there are lawyers that help out with people trying to get federal disability for cheaper prices. But especially in Pennsylvania, I feel like a lot of lawyers are very expensive and charge a lot per hour to do these things. And if that's like a 2 year process, that's a lot of money that you're putting into try to get a disability approval.
Yes, one thing I should definitely clarify on this that I think people don't know is that a disability lawyer is different than a regular lawyer. So they cannot take that much money from you. They do not bill hourly. The way that it works is there's legal red tape in place so that these lawyers cannot drain you of your finances before you even get approved. So I believe, oh, I can't remember. There's a legal dollar amount that they're allowed to take from you max. It's like $700, I think. Maybe like 700 to 1,500 right in there, all in maximum. They legally cannot charge you more than that. And that money comes out of your first disability check you get from the government. So
Okay.
if you think about it that way, first of all, like I said, there's legal red tape, so they cannot charge you, which I think a lot of people don't know about. I personally did not know until I went through this process. And I was like, oh my God, you're not $500 an hour. So that is in place. And then they take it out of the money that you get from the government. So if you are going to get $0, is the way I think of it. If right now you're getting $0 and you're scared to apply, if you apply, say they take that $700 out of the money that they won for you, if you didn't apply, you weren't going to get that money anyways.
Yeah.
So long term, it is 100% worth it. Um, so do your research when it comes to lawyers, and I think people need to not be as scared because it's a very different setup, because I don't know if there's any other part of law that operates like that where there's actually maximums that people have to pay out of pocket.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you clarified that because I had no idea that that was a thing. And I'm sure people that are going through it and think, oh, I have to get a lawyer, probably don't know, like you said, about there being disability lawyers that like can't take all this money from you. So they are less likely to try and get those benefits because they don't want to pay for a lawyer, but really there's ones available that they can afford and they just don't know about it. So
Yes.
I'm very glad that you brought that up. And I know, like we talked about kind of briefly earlier, that there are like certain infusions that can cost like thousands of dollars and aren't covered by insurance. Do you feel like a lot of treatment options that you've been offered have not been covered by insurance or have been like a lot of out of pocket costs for you?
Um, yes. And I think as it relates to people that are battling with chronic illness, one thing to keep in mind is that a lot of people who are battling things like either what I'm going through, like CIDP, or you mentioned Lyme disease, takes a very long time to get diagnosed. So a lot of us spend years and years and years in this medical gray area of an undiagnosed patient or medical mystery, whatever you want to call it. And that's where things get expensive, because that's when insurance doesn't want to kick in. And that's where you need specialized help, because these standard hospital organizations aren't getting you what you need. So I think what's important to think about is the medical system as we know it today is set up for acute illness, not chronic illness. So if you come into the ER with a broken bone and they take an x-ray, they have objective, concrete evidence that they need to pay for your pain medication. They need to pay for the cast that gets put on your arm. They need to pay for the follow-up x-ray to make sure it's healed correctly. They cannot fight that. When you get to these more complex illnesses, it's a lot different, because you have to fight for help over a long period of time, and it's going to be expensive. These doctors, just to back up before we even get to infusions and imaging and stuff like that, just seeing the doctor alone, they have very limited amount of time with each patient, as you mentioned. These insurance companies dictate how much time they can spend with you in the room, which I think is usually like 15 minutes or something like that. And that's used to maximize their revenue, right? So if you're a medically complex patient, they truly are not equipped to handle you. And they cannot give you the time and work it needs to get to the bottom of it. And with doctors, okay, so that leaves out maybe a lot of these big hospital groups. Now you got to look at private doctors. Private doctors either don't take insurance, or they have these crazy administrative fees, and they're far and few between. They're hard to find. So let's say you can get one of these private doctors to diagnose you. Not only are you spending a ton of money to see them, but you also need to consider these very expensive treatments. IVIG is like $8,000 a bag, sticker price, if you were to just Google how much it costs. And some of these IVIG patients, and along with I think many other types of infusions, are on it for 6 months, 10 years, lifelong even. So that's a big risk that they're taking on by even giving it to you. So they're going to do everything they can to not pay for it. So you need to find a doctor to not only try to get you that objective evidence, and B, fight with them on the phone. Because something for me that I wish I would have had access to earlier on that insurance came into play is all these doctors, I've seen 50 to 100 doctors easy before I got diagnosed. They all felt that it was an autoimmune reaction. They didn't know what was going on, but they knew it was autoimmune in nature because it was kicked off by the stomach bug. And I had doctors mention IVIG to me early on, but they were like, we can't diagnose you, so I can't just give it to you. Insurance isn't going to pay for it. Like, I think this is going to help you, but if insurance isn't going to pay for it, how am I going to get access to it, even though the doctor agrees to it? And even if the doctor were to get on the phone with the insurance company and say, I think this girl needs this, they're going to use their doctors to say, nope, there's no evidence, so we don't need to pay for it. And I think I would have, my condition wouldn't have progressed as much as it had I gotten access to that early on. And that goes for even more than just infusions, imaging, even MRIs earlier on. They were like, we don't think you need this MRI. We don't think you need this blood done. And I think that goes for a lot of illnesses. I mean, you see this type of stuff in the news all the time. Even all the stuff in the news recently with the United Healthcare um, debacle or situation that happened is that people are getting denied for things that are actually deemed critical. So there is a big fight and a lot of stuff that ends up needing to be paid for out of pocket. And that doesn't even include holistic things, right? The doctor's going to look you in the eye and say, well, have you tried acupuncture? Well, it's like somebody's got to pay for these acupuncture sessions, you know, these sauna sessions, these special diets that they want you to do because they can't seem to help you. And it definitely adds up to be quite a bit financially.
Yeah, and I think too, kind of going off of what you're saying, America focuses a lot in terms of healthcare on treating the problem after you already have it versus like preventative or like early action to like make sure it doesn't get worse, which in turn makes you spend so much more money because you're not getting the treatment that you need when you need it until you can prove that. And I think that there's like a lot that needs to be done in the US healthcare system, especially. Um, because you have to do a lot of advocating for yourself right now. And I know you've talked about before having to advocate like the difference between you going in by yourself as a woman into a doctor's office and not being taken as seriously as going in with another man with your appointment and like kind of the discrepancies that you see there. So can you share some of like any personal experiences you've noticed of when you've gone by yourself versus when you've gone with a man?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think you get treated very differently, especially, and I'm talking from the perspective of young women. So I think that doctors are a lot more thoughtful, a lot more willing to listen and take your situation seriously when they have an audience. And especially if that audience member is a man. So there's tons of bias with towards women being either hysterical or emotional. And a lot of these doctors who are largely men, you know, pass off women as psychosomatic patients, going back to the anxiety thing. Just, we don't know what's wrong with you. It must be anxiety. Go find a therapist. And so I recommend bringing someone who's a man because it has been proven that men are taken more seriously in medical settings. And an alternative to that is I also think that somebody who's just older than you works, who the doctor sees as a peer. So
Mm.
mother, aunt, grandma, anybody that they feel is a peer to them, truly. Because I just think they see young women as the stereotypical hysterical young women that you read about from like the 1800s. So I think it's just really important to be mindful that the gender health gap is real.
Yeah.
And if you're struggling to get medical help, it definitely doesn't hurt to bring somebody with you to get, you know, the time and consideration that you deserve as a patient.
Yeah. I love that you brought that up because it's like it's so sad to me that over all this time there's still a stigma against women and women are more likely to seek help for medical treatment than men and they're still treated like that, which is so crazy to me.
Yeah, I
But
mean, women are significantly more likely to get misdiagnosed, underdiagnosed, not treated for medications. There's a lot, there's a lot of statistics out there that prove it is tougher to get help. So I do think that anything you can to help get around that obstacle is huge. And I think step one is bringing somebody with you to an appointment.
yeah. So chronic illness is often viewed as like if you can't see the illness, then they're not really sick. Is that something that you've heard a lot about when you were going through your process of like seeking diagnosis and treatment from other people? And how do you respond to that?
Yeah, so for me, I mean, largely I've seen this in medical settings. So I've been very lucky that my family and friends have been very supportive and really understanding about the situation. But people as a whole do stereotype. And I think the biggest thing I see with this is people love to blame the patient, right? You're not being positive enough. You're not manifesting it. You're not on this special diet that my great Aunt Sally did that she's totally cured from. And people don't understand that just because they can't see it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And there's not an actual physical, concrete medical problem going on the inside that, you know, a positive mindset may not fix in the same way that pharmaceuticals can
Mm.
or intervention can. So I think that as a patient, you kind of have two options. One is to educate them and hope that you guys can move forward, or decide to set a boundary, which you're absolutely allowed to do. And I think on the flip side of that, what others need to do who are in the position of a healthy person, for lack of a better word, is listen and validate experiences. Trust that we're not lying to you. I mean, nobody that's going through an illness like this wants to be there. Trust me, we want to be on a hike. We want to be at work somewhere, living our life. We don't want to be dependent on government benefits, stuck in bed all the time. And another thing is avoid offering unsolicited advice. People love to think that they know more than you about your body, that they know more than the doctors do about your body. So I guarantee someone who is suffering from a chronic illness has tried or thought of or considered or researched anything that you're going to say. So
Yeah.
it really does take work, I think, on both sides to move past those.
Yeah, those are really great points. And I know that there are so many misconceptions about chronic illness, like we've talked about some of them over this past hour, however long we've been on here. But um, yeah, that can be really hard to deal with because there's the whole thing of just because you can't see a problem, like you're saying, like you can't see a broken arm, doesn't mean that there's not a problem there. It's just like saying how pain is subjective and not objective. Like you can only tell pain levels from what the patient tells you. I can't look at you and be like, oh, I can rate your pain because of how I'm looking at you. Like you look fine, especially because in other cultures, they don't show pain the same, like they don't express it the same way that. So yeah, those are interesting points to bring up.
Yeah, and I think another thing is they don't know what they don't know, right? So if I show up to somebody's birthday dinner for 2 hours, they don't know that the hour it took me to get dressed heightened all of my symptoms. Just because I have a smile, a happy face, and I'm in a good mood while I'm there doesn't mean that now I need 3 to 4 days that I'm 100% bedridden, cannot take care of myself in pain. They don't see that side. They only see how I was presenting at dinner, which was happy and in a good mood because I was able to push through it and I wanted to push through it. I think something that's really important that I tell people is to make sure that, they stay connected in their relationships and not to isolate too much. And yeah, I just don't think that you can't always see pain, and pain doesn't always, exactly like you said, look the same as it does to everybody. And they don't always see what is going on behind closed doors, which is where a lot of the suffering is happening because people aren't going to lunch with friends and if they can't handle it.
Yeah. And I think that kind of falls into the next question of like, how do you feel like your day to day life has changed from before you got sick to now? Like, your experience visiting friends, relationships, all of that kind of stuff, and like your mental health. How do you feel like that has changed over the past? You've had this since you were 26. So like since that time.
Yes. So complete 180. Oh my gosh. Like the girl that I was before this could not even fathom what was about to hit her in May of 2022. I was someone that was very active. I played tennis. I loved hosting. I loved going out. I worked an amazing job in tech that I love. I exercise 7 days a week. I loved going hiking, concerts. I loved music. I was a huge cook. I used to spend all day on Sundays cooking. Very naturally extroverted. I get my energy from other people in the truest sense. I love being social. And now I spend 99% of my time in bed. I'm in such constant pain that even that 1% I spend outside of my bed is hard on me.
Mm.
And just walking around like outside of my apartment can make me feel worse. So I went from having this very full, active life to my days now are TV and social media and reading. And I would say 1 to 2 days a week, I try to get out for either meeting a friend for coffee or maybe dinner with my parents or my boyfriend. With the exception of that, like I am horizontal in bed. And it has been really hard emotionally to go through this at such a young age. And it's just been such an intense change. Like I said, yeah, it started when I was 26. I'm 29 now. So it has been going on for some time. But as you mentioned, that's not without the side effects of mental health. I mean, I've never struggled with mental health like I have in the past 3 years. And there's a lot of layers, I think, that contribute to that and contribute to the depression and anxiety that accompany going through losing your health. For me, the biggest ones being loss of identity. And I mean, for an instant, some people it's more over time, but you become a person that you no longer know. Like for 26 years, I was this high energy extrovert. I had a very packed schedule. I really valued my hobbies and my career, and that was all just taken from me overnight. And my new identity that was served up to me on a silver platter was bedridden, sad, unable to take care of themselves, unable to exercise, barely able to walk most days. So every single day, I'm definitely going through the grieving process. It's an experience I never imagined I would have had to go through. But I do think, yeah, loss of identity is a huge one, I think, for a lot of us. And then isolation is also a big one with whether that's a physical health challenges or mental health challenges or both, not being able to do the things that you love anymore, not being able to see people as much as you used to. And even if you are able to see friends, maybe an hour masks. And as I mentioned, you're risking a flare up, you're risking your symptoms getting worse. You pretty much don't know how your body's going to react by just showing up to a dinner party, for example. And I think because of that, my social life definitely dwindled because of the physical aspects, but I also developed a really bad social anxiety. I would get such bad anxiety going to meet people for coffee. And the entire time I'm hyper vigilant. Is my pain rising? Is my nausea getting worse? Are the lights too bright? Is that going to cause a migraine? Um, and it just got very, very difficult. And I think with that too, a lot of women that I've seen have also battled this is struggling to connect with their peers. There are a lot of people my age are in a completely different point in their lives. And I could not be more grateful for my friends. They've been amazing, so incredibly supportive, and I literally could not have gone through this without them. But there are still times that, we're sitting and hanging out and I'm hearing about somebody's promotion or a vacation that they're going on. I can't travel anymore either. And it is hard. You want to be very excited for them, and I am, but it is hard to think, oh, like, what do I have to contribute to this situation? I haven't left my bed in a month, and I had one trip to the ER where I left angry that the doctors weren't able to help me. So it is very difficult to, I think, keep up with those relationships and try to show up as yourself in the ways that you used to. And all of this, mind you, is overshadowed by the burden that is the US healthcare system. You're dealing with all these things on such a personal, deep, granular emotional level. And then on the flip side, you're extremely ill. You're having doctors look you in the eye and tell you that you're making this up. It must be anxiety. There's the battles that go into the insurance companies, dealing with medical staff, scheduling, getting imaging approved, and just really dedicating your life to a medical journey that you definitely did not ask for.
Yeah, that's really, really good points. And I can see that would be super life changing going from being an extrovert and traveling and doing all these things to not being able to do that stuff as much anymore. And I think it's also one of those things that the saying comparison is the thief of joy is really hard to go see your friends who obviously you're happy for their achievements and stuff that like promotions or buying a house or having kids, stuff like that. But it can be hard to not think about yourself and wishing that you were in that place again. So I'm glad that you are open with sharing that part of your journey. And I know it can be really hard. What have you done to like try to help combat that with your mental health?
Yes, I think the biggest thing for me that I also recommend to other people is you have to find something else to fill your cup. And there's also understanding that what used to fill your cup is not going to be able to fill your cup now. You're not going to be able to do all the things that you used to. So try to focus on one thing to give you your sense of self back. For me, that was social media. For other people, that could be getting really into knitting. That could be getting really into gaming. Just trying new things that are outside your comfort zone that you can handle physically and mentally because you you have to create a new version of yourself. and you have to redevelop your sense of self and that self-confidence. So I really urge people to try to focus on one thing they can handle, to just give them their piece of person back. And I mean, I really urge people too to pick something that allows you to connect with others. And I mean, with the internet these days, there's so many ways to do that, whether it's connecting with people on TikTok, on Reddit, um, Discord, if you're like really into gaming, for example. For me, it's been posting on social media. And even though it's something I'm only able to spend a couple hours a week max doing, it has given me so much fulfillment and it has been a lifesaver for my mental health.
Yeah. And you run support groups in LA. So, can you talk a little bit about how you got started doing that and how people can get involved in that?
Yes, so something I desperately needed throughout this was a support group. At the end of the day, I needed to understand that there was other people that were going through this. I needed to be able to get doctor recommendations from other people. I needed to get, real life anecdotes on how some of these treatments actually panned out for people. And I just needed that sense of community because there was nobody else I knew that was going through even anything similar to what it was. Um, so I just decided to host a meetup locally. I was like, okay, I'll post on my social media channels. If one person shows up, amazing. If nobody shows up, I'll have myself a cup of coffee and go home. Like, no big deal. And I was actually really excited. We had 10 women show up and it went super well. I had like prepared questions and stuff beforehand, so I wanted to make sure I had structure, and we ended up not even needing them. Conversation was super organic, and I feel that everybody was able to get those questions out there that they had, and get answers from other people in the group. And so I'm doing it monthly. Unfortunately, because the LA fire is going on right now, I had to cancel January. So I'm working on finalizing my February details. I've kind of named it the Chronic Illness Support Club. So you can find more information either on my social media channels or at uh, thechronicillnesssupportclub.com.
Awesome. That's really awesome that you're doing that. I love that you're starting a sense of community, not just so to help you feel less alone, but also to help the other women in your community find people that they can relate to and have conversations about. And also, probably helpful to get stuff off of your chest, like different frustrations you have with dealing with the healthcare system and all of those stigmas. So, I think it's really awesome that you share about that stuff and that you're helping to decrease the stigmas and make more people aware of chronic illness. So,
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised at how many women, I don't, again, when you go through these things, you think you're the only one. And I was surprised that all of us felt like we were the only ones going through it at our ages, because that's another piece of it too, is right now it's focused on 20s and 30s young women, just because a lot of us, we go into these doctors' offices and we're the youngest one there by 40 years. They're like, what are you doing here? What's going on? And it's like, I don't want to be here either, but I need help. And that's often why, I mean, as we talked about, you kind of get dismissed as a young woman, I think. And so a lot of us have, yes, similar frustrations when it comes to not only the healthcare system, but there's also the emotional level to it too, and having to deal with getting help from support systems, explaining this to family and friends. There's a lot of layers to it.
yeah, what do you think that family and friends can do to help support? I know we talked a little bit about like what not to say, what to say. What actions are helpful for them to support you in your treatment journey and just to help you out during that time?
Yes, I mean, I think on a small scale, a text goes a long way. So I remembered that you had your treatment this week. Hope everything's going well. Heart, just something that just lets people know that you're thinking of them. And I think secondarily is a lot of people like to ask what you need for help. I think when you're going through this, you've got such tunnel vision and anxiety is so high that it is difficult to say what I need help with and figure that out. So I think offering help in a way that's very pointed. Can I drop you off lunch today? Can I drop you off a matcha today? You mentioned next week you have an appointment. Do you need me to take you? I think that makes it a lot easier for the patient to not only feel comfortable accepting, but also getting in that routine if you're someone who's newly dealing with this, of accepting help, because that was a big hurdle that I had to jump over. And I think a lot of people do too, is that when you're independent, you don't need help for anything. You can drive yourself to appointments. You can make your own food. Like, help isn't something that all of us accept on a regular basis. But when you get to a point that you're either, physically incapacitated, um, you have to. It's your only way to survive.
Yeah, that's really great suggestions for people. Um, Even like I like that you said like the small things are so important. Just like even if you don't have time to offer to like drive you somewhere, like just sending a text or calling them, letting them know that you're thinking of them. Like even those small things are super helpful. And this is kind of just coming to my mind now, but I'm kind of curious of have you kind of noticed, like, who your support system really is over this time, like, who your true friends are? Like, have there been kind of relationships that have broken off since you have not been able to go out and do as much and stuff like that?
Yes, I definitely think your circle does get a little smaller because the friends that you were friends with because they were mutuals with somebody else, or you only saw them every once in a while at a party or a concert or social event, those looser connections, I don't think can stand the weight of what's going on. But the people that are your true friends, they will stick around and they will be there for you. And the relationship will survive because, they care about the relationship just as much as you care about the relationship. And so I think it's really important to hang on to those relationships and focus on those relationships and not the ones that you lost. It's the people that stayed around during all of this and were there to support you and understand you and listen to you and validate your experiences.
Yeah, that's a really important thing to share with people. That it can take a while, but you'll figure out your support group and find the people that truly love you and care about you and want to support you. And I always like to ask people if they could go back and talk to young Anna when she first was having these symptoms, what would you tell her?
Don't stop pushing forward because there's so many times that you want to give up because you just feel like you're lost in this medical void of no one being able to help you. And you're told there's nothing wrong with you, there's nothing we can do for you for weeks and months and years. Um, don't stop pushing forward because there is someone somewhere out there that will be able to help you. So whether that's a doctor in another state, whether that's a YouTube video that you come across, whether that's digging to the dark depths of the internet to find a rare disease that you just learned about on your own to go get tested for, um, someone will be able to help you either get a diagnosis or improve your condition even in the smallest bit. But you can't get that help unless you keep pushing forward.
That's great. I love that you shared that. And I feel like your account helps so many people because you're truly advocating for not only yourself, but other people that are going through this in the healthcare system and fighting that fight to end stigmas. And it's so important to talk about. And I'm so happy that you are so open and willing to share your journey about it. I think that's all the questions I have for you today. But if you have anything else you want to share, you can go ahead. If not, it's fine.
The only other thing I wanted to share was in relation to the finance discussion. If you're struggling to get financial support for your illness and you are diagnosed, look into foundations. So, for example, I have CIDP, there's a CIDP foundation, and they have tons of resources for financial grants and things like that. And if you're struggling to get coverage on pharmaceutical medications, a lot of these pharmaceutical companies offer programs direct through them. So whether that's either full payment of the pharmaceutical itself or copay assistance, because some of these copays can be really, really high. Look into that. And things like IVIG or different medications, typically more than one manufacturer makes each medication. So your doctor could easily switch you over to another one if you're able to get approved in some way through them. And lastly, talk to your office's front desk about their connecting you to their pharmaceutical rep. So if they're
Mm,
buying a lot of these pharmaceuticals from them, for like IV's example, are registered in office or the infusion center or whoever, they're going to have existing relationships with the pharmaceutical companies that they might be able to leverage in some way, shape, or form to help you with your financial situation.
that's great. That's awesome, awesome information to share. Um, yeah, so go follow Anna. I'll link her Instagram and are you on well, I know TikTok's kind of up in there right now. But what else are you on platform wise?
Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok.
Okay, so I'll link all of that stuff below. So go watch her videos, go follow her because she's really great at advocating for chronic illness and to create a community for you guys. I think that's the end of the podcast for us, but thank you so much for coming on and volunteering to do this. I know that you probably have other things you could be doing right now, so I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to do this.
Oh my gosh, of course. Anything I can do to help, spread the message.
All right, so that's the end. I hope everybody has a good week and love you. Bye. So that's the end of the podcast for this week. Thank you guys so much for listening. I'm so grateful that we got to have Anna on the podcast. I will link her socials down below for you guys so you can follow her if you feel like you relate to her story and want to see more of her content. As always, please, please, please go ahead and give this podcast a 5-star rating. If you don't know how to do that, go to the profile page, hit the 3 dots, and then you can hit rate show 5 stars. That really helps out the podcast and getting the message out there. And share the podcast with any of your family or friends that you feel like could really enjoy this podcast or that it could benefit them. I hope that you guys have an amazing week, and I'm excited to come back next week with another guest. So, love you. Bye.